Hello guys, today's story is I'm being followed by a snowman. It's the only thing that knows what I did. It was a soirée, not a party. That's what Anna told everyone as she dished out canapés and played the perfect host. It was just a few days until Christmas and snowing like I hadn't seen since childhood. The frost that opacified the window panes only made the inside of Anna's Tudor home feel even more warm. I sat in a leather chair and supped on my brandy while I looked out at the night. The neighbors' Christmas lights blinked red and green, and it was still snowing, more gentle now than in the morning. I sighed, knowing that would be the weather I walked home in. There was a quiet din of casual conversation that filled the room, accompanied by the Christmas with the Rat Pack CD playing in the background, as it had been, on repeat since I arrived. It was a nice evening. Although I wasn't really one for socializing, I came as a favor for my sister Anna, just to help her fill seats for her little dinner party. I finished the large brandy and set the empty glass down on the doily-covered windowsill. It was nice visiting my old home, but seeing this chair without my dad sat in it just didn't feel right. His absence was an eyesore. I caught Anna's eye and nodded my goodbye. She smiled in return, happy that I stayed this long. I shrugged past someone I didn't bother to meet and got to the front door. Annoyingly, half a dozen other coats covered my own. I rummaged through the waterproof mound, accidentally dropping a few to the floor as I did, until I found my jacket. I pulled it on me, zipped it up tight, and took my hat from the pocket. I then borrowed a pair of Anna's gloves, which had been lying on the radiator, and made a nice addition to the warm ensemble. With that, I opened the door and heaved myself into the cold night. I was immediately hit by the chill. The warmth of the old house abandoned me, and I pulled my collar high as I began to trudge down the icy pavement. Snowflakes still fell, dancing in the air as they did. I ignored them though, preferring to keep my head down as I walked the empty streets. I live in a small, affluent town in the south of England. Every antiquated house was decorated with lights and the occasional plastic reindeer. But as to keep up appearances, they made an effort to avoid seeming tacky. The year was 2006, and the street lamps still ran on sodium vapor rather than modern LEDs. Their orange-yellow glow enveloped me and gave the bitterly cold night a warm facade. As the moon was shrouded, they offered the only source of light. As such, I had to avoid the usual alleys and cut-throughs, which lay in total darkness. This added another 10 minutes onto my walk home, but I didn't mind. I enjoyed walking alone at night, especially when I knew no one else would be out in this weather. It gave me time to think about my past, which was a rare privilege. I can remember turning a corner as I started to walk up another street, which was on a fairly steep incline. Planted on the small front garden of one of the semi-detached houses was a snowman. The two large spheres which made up its body had half melted and were refrozen into one. Two branches with an uncanny resemblance to the real thing had been expertly picked out to become the snowman's arms. A gnarled carrot acted as its nose, and its eyes and crooked smile were fashioned from small lumps of coal. A moth-bitten blue scarf was wrapped around the snowman's stumpy neck, a child's endeavor to protect it from the cold. I passed it without a second thought, other than to recall the many snowmen I constructed annually in my youth. The icy ground only added to the difficulty of scaling the hillside street. It was the first of many inclines I'd encounter, as my hometown was nestled among the chalk hills of the South Downs. It really was a beautiful part of the country and suffered infrequently from snowstorms like this. When they did occur, however, they blanketed the fields in frost, giving them the same pallid complexion as the chalk cliffs. I passed a house where a party was being held and heard Christmas pop seeping from the red brick walls. I walked from shadow into the light cast by the house's front windows, then back into shadow. Slowly, the din of the festivities faded, and mixed with the harsh wind, I walked along the snow-covered streets, avoiding the pavement that had been turned slippery by frozen gutter water. It was near the end of this particular row of houses, built just south of the old prison, that I saw it again, the snowman. Erected on the small patch of grass next to a driveway that barely passed for a garden, it looked nearly identical to the one before. In fact, it was. Same eyes, same smile, same scarf being tattered in the wind. I frowned at his similarities to the previous snowman, but didn't stop to consider it further. I continued my way home, crossing the empty road over to the miniature park that lay in the center of the red brick estate. It too was frosted over, and the petrified grass crunched under boot heel as I walked. Around halfway, I looked over my shoulder. The mist had eaten anything that lay more than 10 paces behind me. I looked forward again and continued. I lived my entire life here and worked at the brewery that was the heart of the town. I was often on delivery duty and knew the place like the back of my hand. As such, making my way home with little visibility was easier than it sounded. A few more inclined streets later and I was no more than a shortcut through a park away from my home. My fingers felt numb, and I kept my hands lodged between my armpits for warmth. My breath came out like steam from an old train, a constant reminder, if I needed one, of the chill. I couldn't wait to step into my shower and let warm water subsume me. My path was stopped, however. A snowman came lurching into view from out of the mist. It was somehow constructed in the dead center of the road, busy by day, and had the same appearance as the last two I passed. The exact same. There was really no denying it. I can remember thinking as I approached it. It was identical to the other snowmen. It was them. I now stood directly in front of it. It was at eye level, and I could see only blackness coming from his lumps of coal. I took a step back and looked it up and down. The only difference I could make out was the increase in height, which was slight but noticeable. I soon came to the conclusion that a group of kids from the same clique at their school had committed to making these same snowmen around town, perhaps in reference to a piece of media. The answer was sufficient for me back then. Before I encountered what sees behind those coals, I left this third snowman and continued walking towards the frozen park. By virtue of being born a man, in a place free from poverty, I never really felt afraid walking alone at night. But as I left that third snowman in my wake, I felt the hand of fear on my shoulder. I couldn't pinpoint its source, although my eyes now flickered around my grayscale surroundings, my brain turning every shape into an assailant. My pace hurried as I crossed the green fields and passed the children's play park that lay on its far side. The silhouettes of the slides and climbing walls lingered in my mind as I pulled the woolen hat tighter around my skull. For some reason, it occurred to me at that moment that if someone was sprinting toward me from the darkness, I wouldn't hear them past the wind. This realization in mind, I hurried up onto the concrete and held my breath as I passed under the bridge. Houses lurched from my surroundings. I now walked between people's homes yet again, a family dwelling in each. This reassured my scattered mind, as the thought of my own home became its only occupant. My house was one in a row of semi-detached homes built along the side of a hill that continued up to the downs and looked out over the main road. A slate path connected the house to another, almost vertical, slate path which led down into a minuscule parking area. Because of this geographical hostility, very few old people or families with young, wandering children lived in these cliffside houses. Most of the occupants were singletons like me, ranging from their 20s to their 60s. For me, this was home, and it was now only a minute walk away. I emerged from my final street. The main road, usually eternally busy, was now empty, and covered in ankle-high snow bisected by a solitary tire track. I relished being able to cross without waiting an age, and made a show of it. I danced in the middle of the road, twirling and spinning, my arms in the air and my feet skirting the slippery asphalt. I opened my eyes and came to stop, inches from a snowman. It stood stationary in the middle of the road. Wooden arms swayed, and a tattered blue scarf blew in the direction of the wind. I backed up a few steps in horror. It hadn't been there seconds before. I muttered to myself. My words escaped me, accompanied by a trail of frozen breath. I stared at the snowman, who'd been following me this entire time, usually just out of view. It stood there. I put a gloved hand to my forehead, unbelieving in what was right in front of me. I wanted to touch it. I had to touch it. That was the only way to prove it was really there, and not just a hallucinatory figment of hypothermia. As my hand approached the icy surface, I became unsure as to which option was worse. Then, my wool-covered fingertips made contact. It was real, all right. A sudden clarity came, so intense I felt my head begin to ache. I staggered back as I realized I had seen this snowman years ago. I turned to run, but slipped on the frozen tarmac and landed hard on my front. I groaned and pushed myself up, thick blood dripping from my nose and turning the snow red. I looked up, and saw the snowman, which was now in front of me again. I scrambled back on my hands and knees, then lurched to my feet. It had moved, I was now certain. Not taking my eyes off it, I walked to the side in a crescent motion and reached the foot of the steep walkway. I looked away from the snowman, ascending the path as quickly as was possible on the slick stone. I stopped halfway and turned to see if it had followed. I searched the white landscape, expecting to see it peeping from behind every tree or street lamp. It was gone. I let a cold breath out and turned. The snowman was in front of me once again, blocking my path. I took a step back in fear, almost slipping back down the way I came. Panicking, I ducked under the rusting handrail and began to crawl up the inclined hill. Frozen blades of grass shattered under my body weight as I went, eventually reaching even ground. I clambered into a run and didn't stop until I reached my front door. I tore my gloves off and buried my hands in my pockets, desperately feeling for my keys. I glanced behind me as I did. The snowman now stood at the foot of the steps that led up to my door, just a meter away. I turned back around as I found the keys and fumbled them into the lock. I suddenly felt a chill envelop my spine. This time, however, it wasn't from fear. It felt like I had pressed the bare skin of my back against a cold, metal wall. The snowman was directly behind me. The door swung open and I fell inside. I slapped it shut with my boot, got up and quickly locked it. I tried the handle, making sure it wouldn't budge. I ran through the door to my left into the living room and straight to the wide window. From where my house was, I could see down the white hill to the main road. On the far side of it was a frozen pavement and a large brick wall, twice my height, that had only frosted overgrowth behind it. The cars at the base of the hill were covered in snow, and it was as I looked at them did I realize that the blizzard had finally stopped. I scoured every inch of the view. The snowman was nowhere to be seen. Once I was absolutely certain of this fact, I uneasily climbed upstairs, went into my bedroom, and collapsed in a heap. Every time it has snowed since, I have become a recluse. I refuse to leave my house until the last of it melts, and even then I'm weary. Every time it has snowed since, it has gotten closer to the house. The first snowfall of December began earlier today, which prompted me to finally write this. I'm scared this visit will be its last. I didn't mean to kill her. I was 19 and staying at a friend's holiday home in rural Scotland, along with half a dozen other similarly aged lads. There was a blizzard that year too, one that hit the area we were staying particularly hard. I was sent out for a last-minute expedition to the nearest off-license. I borrowed an old van we found on the grounds, which I ended up setting fire to later that night. I drove into town, but alas, all the shops had closed early. By the time I was driving back to the house, the blizzard was already in full swing. Not only was I drunk driving, I was driving while drinking. I had a can in one hand and the wheel in the other. Numerous houses dotted the stretch of forested road up to our holiday home, mostly owned by those with considerable wealth. Big gardens gave way to even bigger buildings, always Gothic in structure, that I would gawk at as I drove past. I found out the full story just under a year later. Her parents were overprotective and didn't let her out that day. She was liable to catch a cold, they said. But the snow has a magical lure to children, and that's why when her parents went to bed that night, she sneaked out. She pulled on her Wellingtons, her coat, and her favorite blue scarf, a warm pair of gloves too. She crept downstairs and, as quietly as she could, unlocked the front door and entered a winter wonderland. It was nirvana for her. After a while of frolicking and forming a heavenly host of snow angels, she set her attention on the main event, building a snowman. A small ball was soon rolled out to form the large base, and another was similarly crafted to fit atop it. The little girl took extra care in making the head, and once it was sufficiently spherical, she got on her bipey toes and placed it like a crown on the snow body. The snowman was built at the very end of her garden, just in case an awoken parent happened to glance out a window. She was hidden in the mist and the snow, with only the full moon to illuminate her own little world. A carrot she'd cleverly taken to bed with her was stuck in to be used for the nose. The nearby coal shed served as a source for the snowman's mouth and eyes. It needed one more thing: arms. She went to the house's black, cast iron gates and slowly opened a gap just wide enough for her to squeeze through. Then she crossed the road to the forest that lay on the other side. She was too afraid to venture deep into the woods. but thankfully, plenty of fallen branches were in reach. She took 2 back and slotted them into place. She then stood back to admire her handiwork and realized one of them was crooked. She shivered, not for the first time that night, and took it out. Then she made her way back out the front gate and to the tree line. Quickly discarding the previous branch, she found one with much more of a resemblance to a human arm. Overjoyed, she turned to cross the road. That's when I drove into her. In the flash of an eye and the screech of a brake pad, her short life was over. The van came to a sudden stop along with her heartbeat. I sat there, clutching the steering wheel until my knuckles were so white I thought they had torn clean through the skin. My mouth opened and closed like a beached fish, gasping for air, but I didn't say a word. Eventually, I undid my seatbelt and got out, both snow and gravel crunching underfoot. I tried to look at her body, but couldn't. It didn't look like a human anymore. I could only make out where her head ended and her crumpled chest began from the tattered blue scarf she wore. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone. This was it. I'd been caught, and my life would never be the same. I can explain. The witness stood still, judging me. Only a stone wall and the noise of the harsh wind stood between us. As my eyes sharpened to the pale moonlight, I realized who had seen me. It was a snowman, as lifeless as the young girl. In that moment of realization, I almost laughed to myself. Instead, I began to cry. I knew it would stay silent. I could actually get away with this. Then, I saw a light turn on in the house. Reality struck me, and I ran back to the van and leapt behind the wheel. While I was gone, my friends had found a stash of old malt whiskey in the cellar. When I arrived, half of them were asleep, and the rest had the cognitive function of the first half. They couldn't speak beyond slurred moans, and certainly couldn't recall my absence to the police the next morning. I did get away with it. I really did. I was hysterical in the aftermath, but learnt to bury any memory of what happened. I tried never to dwell, and eternally told myself that it was an uncontrollable accident. That night in 2006 was the first time seeing my silent witness since it had happened. It has been following me ever since, getting a little closer every time it snows. I have no idea what it's going to do when it finds me in here. But I fear I'm about to find out, for I have just heard the tapping of a tree branch against my window. Thank you for following our story today. If you want to see more, please like and subscribe.